I'll be very honest. When I started to think about Medicaid planning for my parents, I thought I had it covered. I knew the medical side. I knew I had worked in the system for many years, and I knew that we needed to plan for Medicaid. And I hired an attorney who did exactly what I asked. But here's the thing. Everything looked right on paper, yet it wasn't the best plan for our family because no one stopped and stepped back to help me see how all of these pieces actually fit together. If you've ever felt that way, like you're doing everything right, but you're still not sure if you're truly protecting your loved one or even yourself, today's episode is for you. Hey, Christian Care Companion. Welcome back to Dementia Caregivers Support for Christians, the podcast where we talk about the real struggles of dementia caregiving so you can steward this journey well, financially, spiritually, and relationally. Now, before we dive in, have you heard about our new Christian caregiver community? For a one-time investment of less than $100, it's a place for fellowship, practical support, and prayer with other Christian caregivers walking this same road. The first 100 members even receive a 15-minute personal welcome walkthrough from me. You can join today through our website or by clicking the link in the show notes. Today's conversation is going to look a little bit different. I'm joined by Greenville attorney Chase Campbell, and today we're going to talk about one of the most important and often confusing parts of caregiving, Medicaid and estate planning. If you've ever wondered when to start, what questions to ask, or how to make wise decisions before a crisis hits, this episode will give you clear, practical steps. This isn't about being afraid. It's about faithful stewardship, making intentional choices today that bring peace and stability tomorrow. And before we begin, don't forget that our monthly Ask the Dementia Coach session is now open for registration. If you'd like to bring your own caregiving questions to this live coaching opportunity and get your clear next steps for your unique situation, I'd love for you to register and join us. The link for that is thinkdifferentdementia.com/ask, ASK. Now, let us dive into our conversation with Chase Campbell from Chase Law as we talk about Medicaid planning basics and how Christian caregivers can prepare wisely when your dementia caregiving journey begins. All right, Chase, thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm very excited about this conversation. Before you and I came on and started recording, we were talking about Medicaid planning, and I was sharing with you some of my frustrations with a previous attorney who literally did everything I asked, but didn't really educate me about the consequences of some of the decisions I made related to Medicaid and Medicaid planning for my parents, who emigrated to the United States at 60 and 62. So they literally brought everything they own with them. So welcome to our podcast today. Before we get started, how about you tell everybody a little bit more about yourself? To be fair, you are the first person I've had back on as an interview in probably about a year and a half. So it's a very privileged position that you're in today related to, I've been gatekeeping the audience because I want to make sure that they're getting the right information. So welcome today.
Well, thank you. And I'll take the privileged position that we'll call it the pole position.
For sure.
Yeah.
So tell people a little bit about yourself.
Okay. My name is Chase Campbell. I'm the managing attorney at Chase Law Limited Company, a small boutique law firm in Greenville, South Carolina. And we practice three areas of the law: estate planning, business, and probate. But our unusual approach to it is we don't view that as three different practice areas. Those are actually one continuum practice area. If you were to think of, say, a musical instrument, an octave A, B, C, D, F, G, and then it repeats back to A, and therefore, and so forth and so on. And that's kind of the philosophy by which we run our practice, which is those three areas kind of overlap so much that when someone comes in to see us, they'll say, all right, I've got this issue. And we go, all right, here are the elements. And, with just a handful of elements, we make music. We bring order to people's lives of chaos, and we have a lot of fun doing it.
Oh, for sure. So, for today's conversation, mostly the people who listen to this podcast are listening because they are typically family caregivers of somebody living with dementia, right?
Mhm.
And so, if you were to run into somebody who has just found out or gotten a diagnosis of dementia, when do we actually start this planning?
As quickly as possible is the short answer, and I'll explain what I mean by that. One of the things that most people don't realize about our family is dementia has impacted it because my father in law has Alzheimer's. And when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's nearly 11 years ago, I said, okay, the good news is I'm a lawyer
Mhm.
and I've got resources. And so I started calling upon the various resources. And one thing nice about being a lawyer is you develop deep friendships with people who are in various areas. And I started just learning as much as I could. What I did not realize is it's almost like a hall of mirrors. Everyone will tell you very good information, but no one ever draws it down so that all of the moving parts kind of are cohesive. So, the first thing that a colleague of mine said is, all right, you need to understand about the 5-year look back, which is a very, very important aspect of Medicaid planning. And so he taught me all about the 5-year look back, but I didn't understand what it meant in the bigger picture. And then someone else said, all right, one of the things you need to understand is how the dementia will progress. And the short version is it was almost like a mosaic where people would give me a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that. But no one ever said step back and look at where all of these pieces fit together to create that big picture. And you feel as if you're just dealing with microscopic little issues, and the microscopic little issues just start overwhelming you. And if you ever look at a beautiful mosaic, there'll be thousands of pieces, but just by stepping back and looking at it with a little bit of perspective, you can see what, basically the beauty in the picture. And that's how I think Medicaid planning should be approached. And so one of the things that we do is just philosophically, we like to look at things holistically. When someone
Mhm.
comes in and says, here's my problem, all right, let's look at this from a legal perspective because we're lawyers, but it's going to impact this and that and this other thing like family dynamics, relationships, the inversion of the parent taking or the child taking care of the parent, things along those lines that no one ever tells you to step back and look at. And once you step back and look at that, then things start coming into perspective and you start seeing, okay, this is why I'm doing this or
Yes.
why I need to do that. And so the approach we do is we literally draw it out for them as a picture.
Yeah. And I truly appreciate what you are saying right now because you know that my academic and my professional background is an occupational therapist. So for 30 years, working in the medical model, working with patients and patients' families for decades in the United States, understanding Medicaid, and understanding Medicaid look back period and knowing all of that, even myself in my own specific situation, I didn't understand the ramifications, the stepping back from the mosaic and looking at the big picture because I just had pieces of it from the medical lens. And then when I approached the attorney, who did a very good job of doing exactly what I asked her to do, but she didn't do a good job of actually serving me as a human and looking at my unique, specific position. We solved the problem. My dad will be Medicaid proof in 2 months, but it really wasn't the best solution for our specific situation. I do believe there were probably other ways that we could have achieved the same goal had we just had better information and better guidance. And so when you and I met and looking at how you work with your clients, because I've had the privilege of sitting in on some of those meetings, seeing how you take them through a very different process was very refreshing, because you are correct. It's not just a 5-year look back period. It's not just, asset protection. It's family dynamics. It's how do we protect the human who is living with dementia, as well as the family, and make sure that a difficult situation is actually made easier, and not made harder through the whole process. So, what is if somebody hears that if they're now in a caregiving situation, and they know, everybody tells people you got to have your durable power of attorney, you have to have a healthcare power of attorney for, decisions and all those things. Those are little pieces of the mosaic. But if we don't put them in the right place, it's not helpful.
One of the things that most people overlook unintentionally is if a person is diagnosed with dementia, or you start suspecting that a person has dementia, while they're still very much cognitive, sit down and do an estate plan, do the power of attorney, do the healthcare power of attorney, do the will, and if appropriate, do a living trust or an irrevocable trust, or possibly both a living trust and an irrevocable trust, possibly even do a retirement trust. And figure out all of the moving parts because, well, first of all, the person who has dementia, you want to give them as much self determination as possible. And so having them talk through all of those legal aspects in a way that's not overwhelming to them, both gives them a sense of self determination. Like, okay, I may recognize that I'm slipping a little bit, but I've got enough cognitive ability that I want to communicate. Remember that family dynamics are going to be usually it's a parent who has the dementia and it's the kids. And that sense of role reversal is both hard for the child, but also for the parent. And many times the parent is like, let me at least put in place, a parent never ceases to be a parent. So let them put in place the things that they want to communicate to their children before they can no longer do so. But it also gives kind of a guiding light of, all right, here's the estate plan. All right, now when we have to start getting into the Medicaid planning decisions, we have a big picture sense of this is the overall picture that we're going to kind of follow. And so that's why doing those very basic things in an estate planning is so critical, as well as the legal consequences of doing that. Because if someone doesn't take care of it, then every state in the United States has a body of law and a court. Sometimes it's a probate court. In other states, it's the surrogate's court. In some states, in all states, it's the court of incapacity, the
Mhm.
people who can't make those decisions for themselves. And at that point, it gets really draconian because you're going to have someone in charge, usually a probate judge, who is going to be making decisions and oftentimes has never met the person. And so especially here in South Carolina, the entire philosophy of the legislature is take care of these things while you can, but also, please, we will give you every opportunity not to have to go to probate. And so having very, very basic documents can head off a lot of problems.
For sure. So for most people in all of the states, they are you. If you're 18 years old, you need a will.
In all states, if you're 18 years old, you really need a power of attorney and a
Yep.
healthcare power of attorney. And yes, a will is a very good idea. I will tell you, it's overwhelming for an 18-year-old. So we like to break it down into bite-sized pieces. Let's get at least a power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney in play,
Yes.
and
But
then
the reason I'm bringing this out is because even though, like, everybody knows to a large extent, this is not new information to people, yet every single day, when I talk to people, they don't have a will, they don't have a power of attorney, they don't have a healthcare power of attorney for any of these kinds of things. And never mind the person living with dementia, right? So if you, as the adult daughter caregiver, don't have those documents, you need them too. And your parent needs them as well. And use this opportunity to ensure that you have your own documents in place. I mean, we make an assumption that we're going to be healthy and then we're just going to pass away, right? But none of us know. None of us are guaranteed that we don't have a stroke or have a head injury or a car accident or whatever that incapacitates us. So while people are listening to our conversation today, I want them to ask themselves, do I actually have these documents for myself? And if not, what do I need to do to set myself up for success? And then the second question is, does my parent or the person that I'm the caregiver for, do they have these documents, and make sure that they're in place? So we briefly touched on Medicaid.
one thing to do, please go back, even if you have the documents in place, go back and look at them. What we
Yes.
have found is, while they're legally effective for the rest of your life, from a practical standpoint, life changes and people will forget what's in the documents. And they will name people that they haven't talked to in years, or people who passed away, or people who can no longer handle their own finances for whatever reason. One humorous one we had was, a gentleman came in and he said, "Oh, nothing's changed in my life." And then pulled out his power of attorney, looked at it, and realized that the person he named was in jail for embezzlement.
Hmm.
Yeah, so we changed it that day. We found it, from a practical standpoint, almost universally true. It's every 3 years. So
Yeah.
really, the document should be revisited every year. But by the time you hit the 3-year mark, you're probably going to have changes.
That's really interesting. I'm glad that you bring that up because that would be a benchmark that I would not have thought about. But yes, about every 3 years is time enough that things can change. I mean, I know for a fact the one client that I sat in on with you, their power of attorney, the person who was named had already deceased.
Mhm.
And so the subsequent power of attorney was the only one in play. And in this particular situation, the person did not have the capacity anymore to make these decisions for themselves, which means if their power of attorney now dies, we are looking at conservatorship.
That's correct.
So these are things that I think, are very, very important. But like literally every single day when I speak to people, and I ask them, have you done Medicaid planning? They'll look at me like I have grown ahead. And it's like, what do you mean Medicaid planning? So can you take a couple of minutes and explain to people what we actually mean when we say Medicaid planning?
Okay. One of the things I'm going to first do, because it causes so much confusion, is Medicaid and Medicare are two completely different things. Now, they do have a little bit of overlap, or a little bit of collision, but we are forever getting people calling in and saying, "Okay, I need to do Medicare planning. Do you
Yep.
by any chance need Medicaid?" No, I need Medicare planning. And a little bit of discussion sometimes yields that it really is Medicaid planning. Other times, they really do need something like a supplemental Medicare, Part B, Part C, whatever is the case. It is funny to watch that confusion. There is a little bit of overlap, and the two do interplay a little bit. So It's not totally far-fetched that people are that confused. Medicaid planning, one of the things you've got to understand is the history and the purpose of Medicaid law. Medicaid was essentially a program started last century, said, all right, we need a safety net of making sure that people who need medical services are taken care of. And most people think of Medicaid as monolithic, meaning there's only one program and it's for people who are aged. That's one thing that people need to understand from the get go, because if you are doing a Medicaid application and you apply for the wrong program, they have to deny you. And it causes a whole lot of frustration and consternation and et cetera. We had one who came in and she was 78 years old and she had accidentally applied for the Medicaid program for pregnant teenagers.
Yeah,
And
it's not going to work.
we all had a really good laugh about it. But she lost about 4 months of application because they had to deny it because she didn't qualify in any sense of the word on it. So, but what we mean by Medicaid planning is essentially two things. There is what we would call crisis planning, which is someone either needs to go into a facility or is already in a facility or is imminently needing to go into a facility. And then the other kind is pre-planning, which is, all right, how are we going to do this where it's down the road? We may never need to go into a facility. There's a good chance we may need to go into a facility, but it's down the road. And essentially the hallmark of this is the longer the runway before we need someone to go into a facility, the more we can do and the better we can plan. And one, it goes back to the concept of self-determination. But the second is we can do some asset protection and we can be more systematic as to how we're going to use that person's assets. So again, the longer the runway and the big benchmark that everyone thinks of is the 5-year look back. And that's a good part of the runway. But even if you're within the 5 years, the earlier you are in the process, the better. The more the runway, even within the 5-year look back, the more in the way of assets we can protect. And so ultimately, the goal is how are we going to maximize the protection of the assets and how are we going to make them available to supplement the taking care of the person who needs to be taken care of. One thing that I do want to talk about a little bit is it is not just skilled nursing that we're talking about. There are a couple of other programs. One is for assisted living or memory care, but not needing skilled nursing. Very similar, slightly different qualifications for that program. And then there's a program that has been working wonders called the CLTC, the Community Long-Term Care, that you basically, South Carolina has really embraced that, saying, all right, we are going to try keeping people in the home and supplement what they need in the home so that we don't need them to go into a facility, or they will be better off being with family who needs a lot of help. And those qualifications, as I said, are very, very similar to the skilled nursing Medicaid program, but you need to be very intentional on how you're going to protect those assets if that's going to be the goal. So we really need to know kind of how much time, what kind of care they're going to need, whether it's going to be in a facility, skilled nursing, assisted living, or is it going to be in the home, or is it going to be a progression before we can start figuring out, okay, this is what that mosaic picture needs to look like. And when we get into those questions, then we're really asking the questions about family dynamics. We're talking about economics. We're talking about just how is the caregiver doing and how are we going to allow them to tap out just to take a break, and what kind of skills do they have to take care of it, and are there any limitations on, oh, we think that the son is going to take care of the mother, but the son is about to ship out in the army. There's a lot of dynamics that we just have to spend time getting to know them before we can ever start planning it out. And so when we sit down and talk to someone for the first meeting, it's usually 90, 120, sometimes 150-minute long, just asking questions about them. And
For sure. I'm very glad you brought up the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, because people do not understand the difference of Medicare. Medicare is your hospital benefits and home health and hospice and things like that. Medicaid, and I'm really glad you brought up community long-term care, because community long-term care is a very good way to actually help keep somebody in their home without putting them in a facility. But not knowing all of the different types of Medicaid, it can be very, very overwhelming for people. So I mentioned to you right at the beginning, that I might have done things a little bit differently. And I also mentioned to you that in 2 months, literally 2 months, on the 9th of December, my dad becomes Medicaid proof. We put it in a life trust, but it was also not probably the best decision for me and my sister. Looking at the limited amount that you know about us, what might you have told us to do differently?
one of the hardest things is life happens so much that you cannot predict. Going back to the 3-year life cycle, you have a pretty good idea of what's coming down the pike in the next year. There'll be surprises.
Mhm.
You get 2 years out, it's harder to predict. You get 3 years out, that's kind of the limit of what we can accurately predict. And even then, it's probably a little bit of a 50% yes and 50% we just completely missed that was going to be coming down the pike. So when you get to 5 years, nearly double that, it's really, really hard to predict. So I like to build in a lot of maximum flexibility as I can, as much as is possible. Some things that I would probably want to explore is how comfortable are you guys with an irrevocable trust? There's several different kinds that are really good depending on how comfortable someone is about turning over their assets, or at least not having complete control of their assets. The second thing that I would be looking at is, all right, what kind of gift tax issues are we having to look at? What kind of income tax issues are we having to look at? What kind of property tax issues are we trying to look at? And there is never a one size fits all type thing. You almost have to go, all right, here are the various pieces that we've got to kind of navigate through. And given those constraints, what's the best that we have as much as we can predict
Mm.
5 years, 10 years down the road? One of the things that I will tell you that is a given is if you have enough time, you want to start getting assets out of the person's name. And so, whether is that by gifting, is that by irrevocable trust, is that by life estate with remainders? There's a number of things that we can do to say, all right, in this way, we are going to try getting assets out. And the various assets the person has will have an impact because the law treats assets differently. So, real property is treated differently than, say, a bank account, which is treated differently than a retirement account, which is even treated very differently than a bank account. And even though they're all dollar signs on those last three categories, the law treats them very, very differently. And so the strategy that we may do on one asset may not be the same strategy that we do on the other. So one of the things that I would do is say, all right, given what we know and how comfortable we are with relinquishing control, what is the likelihood that we've got the 5 years? And then what kind of assets are we looking at? And the rule that you got to understand Medicaid is, the ground rule is you can only have $2,000 in assets. But that's with a big asterisk next to it, because Congress says there are certain types of assets that may or may not count against that $2,000 cap. For instance, if you have a house, all right, that house won't necessarily count, especially if you have a spouse or an adult child that is living in the home, helping take care of the person with dementia. Or if you have a special needs child that also lives, so you've got to understand kind of the dynamics of the people who are surrounding the client. And then all right, in light of this, we can do this type of, we may be able to do A, B, or C, but long term, because of family dynamics, B has to be off the table. So that only leaves options A and C. And C, we're going to use that option for something else. So, well, that tells us that we have to use A. So it's a process of elimination. Or sometimes it's a process of, okay, we got A and B, let's choose one. The analogy that AJ, one of our attorneys, uses in the office a lot of times is Medicaid planning is like squeezing a balloon. If you squeeze one side a little too much, the other side balloons out. So you try to figure out what is going to be the happy medium, where nothing is getting too much pressure, nothing's getting not enough pressure. And then we go, all right, that's going to work. And everyone goes, yeah, I see the picture and we'll make adjustments if we need to. So
I love that answer. That was really a very good answer. I really love the analogy of squeezing the balloon, because I think that's in essence what happened with me, right? We squeezed the balloon in one spot, but she didn't do a good job of protecting the other side of the balloon. It was a very one-sided. It was good for my parents. It was good for protecting their sole remainder asset, which is the condo, right? But it wasn't necessarily good for the extended picture. What would you say to somebody listening who believes they don't have assets worth protecting? Because I run into this a lot, and then they'll tell me, but my mom doesn't have any money. Yes, but she's sitting on a paid for house.
yes. So it astounds me, and I've experienced it myself because I do my own. Sorry, I submit myself to doing estate planning. And as any good lawyer, I don't do my own. I have someone else do it for me.
Who's
And
agent?
yes, well, I surround myself by several good ones, but yes,
There
AJ
you
happened
go.
to
I
be
meant
the last one.
your offices. Let's
Yeah.
stay that way.
And it amazes me what people say that what people don't realize that they have in the way of assets. And so that's one of the reasons that we draw it out in the big picture, is because by the time everyone says, I just need a simple estate plan, I don't have much. Okay, humor me, let's just talk this out. And I had one who she looked at her husband, she goes, we're not that wealthy, are we? And he goes, yes, honey, we're worth several $1,000,000. She just didn't realize it. So people do have more than they realize.
Mhm.
And at the same time, amazingly, people have less than they realize, or less than they think that they do in many respects. And so putting it up in the picture is very, very helpful. But then it also becomes clearer once you see what kind of assets. Okay, remember, assets are treated differently under the law depending on what we're trying to do. And that's where we start moving things around into the correct buckets. And that usually makes the solution more apparent.
More apparent. So for somebody who is in South Carolina, obviously I want them to call you. But for a person who is living somewhere else in the United States, what might some good questions be for them to actually ask an attorney to know that that attorney is going to do a good job of asset protection Medicaid planning for them? Because I honestly thought I knew what I was doing, and I did not know what I was doing. And so maybe if I had known better questions to ask the attorney, maybe we can help people listening with some of those.
I'll give you some questions. I'll answer your question directly. But one of the things that I would encourage clients looking for is the intangible things. First of all, when you're talking to the attorney, do you get the warm fuzzies? Do you get a sense of calm and peacefulness? Doesn't mean that they don't know what they're talking about, or that they're not competent at what they're doing. But personalities do make a difference, because you want to make sure that you're comfortable with them. And just as much, you want to make sure that they're comfortable with you. And it may be something as simple as just the way you think And does it meld well with the way that the attorney thinks? Not every client is a perfect client for us.
Mhm.
We really do try seeing if it's a good match, just personality wise, because it will make all the difference in the world. It's kind of like marriage. You don't want to just marry anyone. You want to marry someone who fits with you. And now I'm not suggesting that attorney-client relationships are marriage, but it's pretty intimate, because for us, it's a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
We've had relationships that are now approaching 30 years. And so we want to make sure that we're looking for someone who fits us well and we fit them well. The second is the second intangible I would say is, are they explaining it in a way that you're understanding it? And again, that kind of goes back to personality. Um, for the people who are more engineer minded or more linear thinking, can the person explain it to you in a way that you're understanding? For the people that are more random access minded, all right, can that person explain to you in a way that you can understand? Because at the end of the day, if the client doesn't understand it, they'll become frustrated, but they'll also not be able to um, actively participate, contribute to this. And I view it as a partnership of, all right, you've got a problem, you've got a vested interest in that problem. I've got some skills, I've got a vested interest in helping you. All right, does it jive? And are you able to understand what I'm trying to explain to you? And the third is, and I use this analogy all the time, if you can explain it to a 5-year-old or at least a fifth grader, then you're doing a really good job. Because the concepts sometimes need to be broken down into that simple of it, even for the most erudite among us, because it
Mhm.
is an overwhelming. And if the person can do that, then that's great. But then just, all right, explain to me kind of how all of the moving parts work together and how do we tackle this? And if this occurs, then what do we do here? And sometimes the answer is once we commit on a course of action, we can't kind of go back. But other times it's okay, here are the potential tweaks that we could do to the game plan. And, just in asking them those questions, you'll get a sense of, do they know what they're talking about and can they address the particular questions that you are struggling with?
Mhm. Go ahead. Did you have something else to add?
I was going to say, and as much as possible, and I'll go back to the intangible, how much are you getting to see the big picture? I'm not expecting the attorney to be able to explain everything, but they need to be open minded enough to, all right, how does this impact these other non legal areas? And how are
Mhm.
you addressing those things? One of the things I learned very early on is um, working with a person with dementia is exhausting. And the question of, all right, here's the game plan, but if the caregiver gives no relief, then the caregiver is going to burn themselves out, or something's going to give, or they may end up in the hospital. And then what do we have? And so those are some of the bigger questions that need to be addressed
For sure.
in the context of the legal aspects.
So, is it ever too late to do Medicaid planning?
It is more of a challenge later on. And there are times, the short answer is yes, if someone has passed away. But
Oh,
shy of
yeah, for
that,
sure.
there usually is some degree of Medicaid planning that can occur, or sometimes people have unwittingly planned themselves without ever doing a plan. I've had people come in and they say, okay, I need to do Medicaid planning. And by the time we get done looking at it, we're like,
You don't
probably would
need
take
to.
2 months. You're done. You're out of assets at that point. So,
Yeah. So, I guess the question was more, maybe I should reframe it in this way. What's the best time to do Medicaid planning? Like,
um,
I'm 55. Is it the right time for me to do Medicaid planning, or With my parents, they were 75 when I started doing Medicaid planning for them. My mom predeceased my dad, but my dad will be 80 in February, and he's still alive and still going fairly strong. So, at least I protected some things. So when is the best time?
It's going back to the old adage of when is the best time to plant a tree. The answer is 20 years ago. What's the second best time today? There's a lot of truth to that statement. It really comes down to what kind of assets are we trying to protect and how. I have done Medicaid planning for as young as a 40-year-old because we were starting to need to do some Medicaid planning on what are we going to do with the business and how are we going to structure. This was a person who was a business owner of actually several businesses. And so a little bit of at least
Mhm.
forward thinking of how are we going to structure that business for the Medicaid plan, the eventual Medicaid planning, became important. Um, I would say the sweet spots for most people, 80% is between the 55 and 70 range. Again, you can never be too early. I mean, I guess 18 years old, you can be a little too early. But, just even in the process of thinking it through and at least addressing it. And there are some really interesting ways of doing a Medicaid trust where you start putting assets that you really don't need today in, but you're just kind of seeding the plan for long term. And that's what we did with 40-year-old.
I love it. Thank you so very, very much. Now, for people in South Carolina, you work with people only in the upstate area, or do you work with people all over South Carolina?
We work with people all over South Carolina. We
Okay,
have gotten people as far away as 4 hours away. So, yeah.
gotcha. And if people wanted to connect with you specifically here in South Carolina, what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, our website will give you a lot of information. And of course, that's a good place to go to if you say, all right, I can't remember all the details about what they just talked about, which is very simple, chaselaw.com. And Chase
Mhm.
with a C, as my mother jokes, after giving birth, she can't be held responsible for how she spells anything. So,
That's funny.
but the other way, if you're interested in talking with us, give us a call at the office. My legal staff is really good at answering questions and just getting to know you. And but something that we do that is a lot of fun is we will have periodically Chase After Dark, which is a very informal meeting on a given topic, and we'll announce it several weeks in advance, sometimes several months in advance. And if you find the topic of interest, then please let us know that you're coming, and so we can plan accordingly. And if no one is interested, then we realize that it's not a topic that's meeting anyone's needs, and we'll close it down. But we've got one on what is Medicaid and Medicare, the confusion between the two coming up on the end of this month. I think it's the 23rd. Uh, Next month, we'll be doing something else because had enough questions about Medicaid that we decided that we were going to tackle it. And then the number of questions just kind of lent itself into two different categories. And depending on the topic, we will sometimes do it, educational lecture style. Sometimes we'll do it almost a community open forum. We had one that was just how do families need, what do they need? And that ended up just being a time where half a dozen families just connected with each other. It was
Mhm.
almost like, okay, we are not the only ones going through this. And we just facilitated a space for them to be able to sit down and talk with each other and get a sense of, I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, thank you so much. And I will make sure that your website and your phone number and everything is put in the show notes for this program today. And as always, I really appreciate your time and your expertise. I love what you do with your practice, and I cannot wait for the right opportunity for me to work with you, because I'm probably going to need that at some point. Probably not too long from now. I do have my basic documents in place, but the rest of them definitely need to be looked at. So Chase, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
You are welcome.